My rich grandmother died and left everything to me. My family had already spent the money. So the thing you have to understand first is that my grandmother Elodie was not supposed to like me. That sounds strange, but it is the most accurate way I can put it. In my family, the expectation was clear, and it had been clear my whole life. My grandmother Elodie was my father's mother, and my father Roland had 3 children, and the one she was supposed to favor was my older brother Colt, who was named after my grandfather, and who had my grandmother's eyes, and who had been groomed from approximately birth to be the family's golden continuation. Colt was the one who got taken to dinner alone with Grandma Elodie when he was a teenager. Colt was the one whose college visits she attended. Colt was the one she introduced at her church with her hand on his shoulder and a particular pride in her voice that she did not use for my younger sister Addie or for me. I was the middle one, Maya. The one who asked too many questions and read too many books and had opinions about things that middle children in families like mine were not really supposed to have opinions about. My grandmother and I had a relationship that was cordial and a little bit distant for most of my childhood. The relationship of 2 people who respect each other without being entirely sure what to do with each other. That changed the summer I was 19. I was home for my first year of college and I was working a summer job at a garden center because I needed the money and because I genuinely liked the work, the physical straightforwardness of it, the way plants either thrived or they did not, and the reasons were usually findable if you looked carefully. My grandmother came in one afternoon to buy something for her back porch. I did not know she was coming. She did not know I worked there. She came around a corner of the outdoor section and we looked at each other with the mutual surprise of people encountering each other outside their expected context. She ended up staying for 2 hours. We walked through the whole outdoor section together, and she told me what she was trying to do with her back porch, and I told her what I thought would work and what would not and why. And somewhere in the middle of that conversation, something shifted between us. She started asking me questions that were not about plants. What was I studying? What did I want to do with it? What did I think about things? Real questions, the kind that expect real answers. I gave her real answers because I did not know enough yet to give her anything else, and she listened to those answers with an attention that I was not used to from her, and that I found both startling and honestly wonderful. We had lunch after that at a diner down the street. She ordered coffee and a piece of pie, and she told me, unprompted, that she thought I was more than people gave me credit for. She said it plainly, the way she said most things, without decoration. She said she had not been paying close enough attention, and she intended to correct that. I did not tell my family about that lunch. I'm not sure why. It felt like something that was mine. Over the next several years, Grandma Elodie and I built something real. We talked on the phone more than I talked to either of my parents some months. She came to my college graduation, sat in the front section, wore a hat that was extremely memorable. When I moved to Nashville for a job in landscape design, she sent me a card that said she was proud of me, and I have that card in a drawer in my desk right now, and I'm aware of exactly where it is at all times. I did not broadcast any of this. My family knew Elodie and I had gotten closer, but I do not think any of them understood the degree of it, and I did not correct their understanding, because it was not hurting anything, and because some things feel smaller and more fragile when you expose them to air. My grandmother was 81 years old and sharp as anything, until a stroke took most of that sharpness away over the course of about 18 months. I visited as often as I could during that time. I coordinated with her care team. I drove up from Nashville on weekends more times than I can count, and sat with her in the sunroom she loved and talked to her, even when the talking was mostly one-sided near the end. She passed on a Tuesday morning in April, peaceful, in the house she had lived in for 53 years. I cried for a week, not performing grief, just genuinely missing someone who had seen me clearly. The will reading was 3 weeks after the funeral. My parents, my brother Colt, my sister Addie, 2 of my aunts, and an uncle were all present in the office of my grandmother's attorney, a measured and unreadable man named Fitzwilliam, who I suspected had seen enough family will readings to be completely unsurprisable. I was present too, at the end of a row in a black dress, having driven up from Nashville the night before. Colt was sitting in the center of the room, with the posture of a man who believes he is about to receive something he has already mentally spent. He had been making comments for the better part of the 3 weeks since the funeral that were just barely subtle enough to claim plausibility. Things like, well, we're going to need to think about the house. Things like, I assume the financial accounts will need to be distributed. Things like, to me specifically at the reception after the funeral, I know you 2 got close, but obviously the bulk of things will go to me as the eldest grandson. That is just how Grandma always operated. I had said nothing to any of this. Fitzwilliam read the will, the house and its contents and the investment accounts and the savings and the vehicle, and a piece of commercial property Elodie had owned for 30 years that none of us had known was worth what it turned out to be worth. All of it. The overwhelming majority of the estate went to me. There were smaller bequests. Colt received a specific watch that had belonged to our grandfather. Addie received the china set. My parents received a modest sum that was real, but not dramatic. The aunts and uncle received various personal items with sentimental value. Everything else was mine. The number, when Fitzwilliam named it with the calm of someone reading a weather forecast, was large enough that the room did a thing rooms do when a number that size lands in them unexpectedly. A kind of collective stillness, like everyone has breathed in at the same time, and nobody has breathed out yet. Colt turned and looked at me. I looked back at him. Fitzwilliam continued reading. The drive back to Nashville that evening was one of the stranger experiences of my life. I was driving alone because I had come alone, and I had the specific surreal feeling of being a person whose life has just changed in a concrete and numerical way, but whose body is still just a body sitting in a car on an interstate watching the Tennessee landscape do its thing in the early evening light. My phone started going off about 40 minutes into the drive. My mother first, then my father, then Colt, then Addie, then one of the aunts. I let all of them go to voicemail, not out of cruelty. I just needed to get home first. I needed to be in my own space before I engaged with whatever was coming. I got home. I fed my cat. I made tea. I sat at my kitchen table, and I listened to the voicemails in order. My mother's was soft and careful, saying she was so happy for me, and that Grandma clearly loved me so much, and that she just wanted to talk when I had a chance. My father's was similar, but with a slightly tighter quality underneath it, the voice of a man managing something. Colt's was not soft or careful at all. He said he needed to talk to me urgently. He said there were things about the estate that needed to be discussed as a family. He said he was not sure the will reflected Grandma Elodie's actual intentions given her condition in the last 18 months. He said he thought we needed to get everyone together before anything was finalized. I listened to that one twice. Then I called my friend Sasha, who was a paralegal, and who is also the person I call when I need someone to be both practically useful and entertainingly furious on my behalf. I told her about the will. She said, "Oh, that's amazing. Congratulations." I told her about Colt's voicemail. She said a word I will not repeat, and then she said he is going to contest it. I said I thought so too. She said, "How was your grandmother's mental state documented in the last 18 months?" I said extensively, because I had been coordinating with her care team, and there were records. Sasha said, "Okay, do not call any of them back tonight. Call Fitzwilliam's office first thing tomorrow morning." I said, "Okay." She said, "Maya, this is yours. She chose you. Don't let them take it." I called Fitzwilliam the next morning. He was, as established, unreadable, but I detected something in his voice that might have been the professional satisfaction of a man who had anticipated exactly this call. He told me he had already received a message from Colt's attorney, which meant Colt had contacted an attorney within approximately 16 hours of the will reading, which told me everything I needed to know about how long he had been sitting on this plan. Fitzwilliam told me that the will was well constructed and had been prepared over 2 years ago, before my grandmother's decline, at a point when her capacity was not in question. He told me he had documentation of her state of mind at the time of preparation. He told me that challenges of this nature were common and that they were also, in cases like this one, usually unsuccessful. He recommended an estate litigation attorney named Carver, who he described as thorough. I called Carver. Carver was a woman in her 50s who had the energy of someone who has won enough of these to find them interesting rather than stressful. She reviewed everything I sent her over the following week and came back to me with an assessment that was direct and relatively calm. She said the case for contesting was weak given the timeline of the will's preparation and the documentation of my grandmother's capacity at that time. She said the case would likely not survive a preliminary challenge if it came to that. She also said something else that I found interesting. She said that in her experience, families who contested wills of this nature almost always did so because they had already made financial decisions based on an anticipated inheritance. She said it was worth understanding whether anyone in my family had done that before I had any conversations with them. I thought about what Colt had said at the funeral reception, about how the bulk of things would obviously go to him. Obviously. Here's what I found out over the following 3 weeks through a combination of direct conversations. Things my sister Addie told me, because Addie has never had a poker face in her life, and one remarkable phone call with my Aunt Cheryl, who had apparently decided that honesty was the appropriate policy. Colt had taken out a personal loan 8 months before my grandmother died, using the anticipated inheritance as informal collateral with a private lender. The kind of arrangement that is not technically secured against the estate, but that Colt had apparently described to the lender in terms that made it sound considerably more certain than it was. The loan was for a significant amount. He had used it to put a down payment on a house that was larger than his income could support on its own. My parents had made a smaller, but still real financial decision based on similar assumptions. My father had retired 18 months early from a job he probably should have stayed in longer, with the understanding, apparently discussed openly between him and my mother, that Elodie's estate would provide a cushion that made early retirement viable. I sat with this information for a long time. These were not people who had done nothing wrong and been surprised by an unexpected outcome. These were people who had built financial structures on top of an inheritance they had assumed was certain and had not thought to verify. Colt had done it aggressively and deliberately. My parents had done it with the softer recklessness of people who wanted something to be true and chose to believe it without checking. And now they were coming to me. The family meeting happened at my parents' house on a Saturday. I drove up. I sat in the living room I had grown up in, and I looked at my father and mother on the couch and Colt in the armchair. He always took, and Addie beside me being the only person in the room whose hands were not doing something nervous. Colt spoke first, which was predictable. He said he thought the will needed to be looked at more carefully. He said Grandma Elodie had not been herself in the last period of her life. He said he was not accusing anyone of anything, but that he thought it was worth examining whether the document reflected her true wishes. I said, the will was written 2 years before she declined. Fitzwilliam has documentation. 2 years ago she was already starting to, Colt, I kept my voice even. She was sharp 2 years ago. You know that. Everyone in this room knows that. Silence. My father said more quietly that he hoped we could approach this as a family. That Grandma Elodie would have wanted the family to be taken care of. That there might be a way to distribute things that honored everyone. I looked at my father for a moment. This was the man who had retired early on the assumption of money that was not his. Dad, I said, she wrote a will. The will is how she took care of the family. She decided what she wanted to do with what she had built and she wrote it down while she was fully capable of writing it down. That is her taking care of the family. Maya, be reasonable. I am being reasonable. I am being exactly as reasonable as a legal document prepared by a competent adult requires me to be, Colt said. So you're just going to take everything? I looked at him. She gave it to me. I said, I did not take anything. She spent the last several years of her life deciding what she wanted to do with what she had, and she told a lawyer, and the lawyer wrote it down. I visited her every month. I coordinated her care. I sat with her in the sunroom when she could not always remember my name, but she always seemed glad I was there. I did not do any of that for the money, but she knew I was there. And apparently it mattered to her. Colt said something that I'm not going to repeat here because it was ugly, and because the ugliness of it is the least interesting part of what happened. Addie from beside me said quietly but clearly, Colt, stop. He stopped. Mostly from surprise, I think. Addie did not usually do that. The contest did not go anywhere. Carver handled it with the efficiency she had projected, and it was resolved at the preliminary stage without going further. Colt's attorney apparently advised him clearly about the strength of his position, which was the position of a man with no position, and the challenge was withdrawn. Colt's loan situation resolved itself in the way these situations resolve when the anticipated resource does not materialize, which is badly and with consequences. He had to sell the house he had bought. I know this because Addie told me, and because it is the kind of thing that is hard to keep quiet in a family of our size. I did not help him. I want to be honest about that. He did not ask me, which I think was the first genuinely wise decision he made in this entire sequence, and I did not offer. My parents were a more complicated situation. My father's early retirement was not immediately catastrophic because he had some savings, and my mother still worked part-time. But it was uncomfortable, and they both knew it, and I knew it. I thought about it for a long time. I thought about the fact that they had made a bad decision, but that the bad decision had come from a place of human wishfulness rather than the deliberate calculation Colt had brought to his. I thought about my mother's voicemail, the soft and careful one, and how she had said that Grandma clearly loved me so much. I called my mother on a Tuesday evening. I told her I was not going to pretend the last few months had been easy. I told her I was not going to act like I did not know why my father had really retired when he did. But I told her that I was going to help them in a specific and structured way with what they actually needed, because she was my mother and because Grandma Elodie had given me enough that helping the people she loved was something I could do. My mother cried. I let her. Then I told her the help came with one condition, which was that we were done pretending. Done pretending Colt had been treated unfairly. Done pretending my grandmother's decision needed explaining or apologizing for. Done with the version of our family where I was the middle one, whose relationship with her own grandmother needed to be managed and minimized because it complicated the story everyone had already decided to tell. My mother said, "Okay, Maya, just that." Okay, Maya. It was the first time in my life she had said something like that to me, without a qualifier attached, and I felt it in a place I did not expect to feel it. I still live in Nashville. The commercial property my grandmother owned turned out to be a genuinely good asset, well located and solidly tenanted, and I have a property manager handling it while I figure out the longer arc of what I wanted to do with it. The house I'm keeping for now. I go up some weekends and work in the back garden, which is overgrown and needs significant attention, and which I find I do not mind at all. I found a photograph last spring in a box in the spare room. My grandmother and me at the garden center, the summer I was 19, standing next to a display of climbing roses. I do not know who took it. I do not remember anyone taking it. But there we both are, squinting a little in the sun, and she has her hand on my arm, and she is laughing at something, and I'm laughing too, and we look like exactly what we were. Two people who found each other when neither of them was looking. I have the photograph on my desk now, next to the card she sent when I moved to Nashville. Colt and I do not speak. I'm okay with that. She knew what she was doing.